I'm about to use a dirty word, audits. Now, I'm not entirely sure where the connotation that an audit is a bad thing came from, but I have a great deal of suspicion it originates from one of our favorite governmental agencies, since tax audits happen to be the most common type of audits an individual will ever go through. Now, there's a great variety of audits, varying degrees of complexity, but I'm not here to talk to you about all those different audits today. I don't want to bore you with the details of the history of audits. Instead, I want to talk to you about the common types of audit for nonprofits and charter schools, give you a wealth of information about audit readiness and what it means to have an audit trail, and finally briefly cover advantages to regular audits and proper internal control systems. An audit in its simplest form is a review of an entity or an individual's accounts. There are two general families of audits, those conducted by an external party and those conducted internally. External audits, such as financial compliance audits, are what we're going to talk about today, but internal audits can also be conducted. Those are typically performance or efficiency audits. Today I'm going to focus on discussing the financial and compliance audit, since external regulators tend to impose much greater penalties for audit failures than an internal audit. Both financial and compliance audits ultimately result in the generation of an audit opinion by an external party, in this case an accounting firm. The financial audit provides an opinion on the fairness, accuracy, and conformance with generally accepted accounting principles, while a compliance audit focuses on whether an entity complied with certain regulatory requirements or grant requirements. I like to use the analogy that an audit is like going to the doctor and getting a checkup. Doctor is going to run some tests, might make you perform a few tests or exercises, and get some other measures to perform an overall assessment of your health. We all hope for that clean bill of health, but if any irregularities are identified, the doctor can provide us with the proper medicines or dietary changes or lifestyle changes to make the corrections. An audit is not an exhaustive review of every single document. Instead, it's a sample of documents that we're looking at, performing some tests, asking some questions to get a general assessment of the organization. Now, most organizations don't choose to be audited, but instead are required by some other external party, such as a granting agency or a regulatory body. As is the case with charter schools in California, the state of California, the California Department of Education, and the State Controller's Office require an audit annually. In the nonprofit realm, the most common externally imposed audit is what's known as a single audit. This is required if an entity expends more than a certain threshold of dollars of federal funds in any given year. Charter schools in California also receive a state compliance audit. These are procedures that the California Department of Education requires to be audited each year as a condition of receiving state funds. Since an audit involves a review of documents, it's important to maintain what's known as an audit trail. So what is an audit trail? Well, let me first answer your question by asking another question. Place yourself in the shoes of someone accused of a crime. Do you know where you were last September 1st at 6 p.m.? What about the year before? What about July 21st? Most of us, myself included, wouldn't be able to answer that question without any degree of certainty, without looking at my Facebook page or my bank account records to find out some hint of what I was doing. In a sense, this corroboration of evidence is a type of audit trail. Now, don't assume through that example that any time you're getting audited, I think it's the equivalent of being on trial, but you get the point. Preparing for an audit also requires an understanding of the value of the information being presented. A document that provides for an external or independent verification of facts is much more substantial than a document created by the individual being audited. For example, if asked to verify a bank balance as of June 30th and given two options, a bank statement from the bank or someone in the organization telling you what the balance is, it's easy to see how the bank statement gives you the ability to more confidently and accurately identify what that bank balance is on June 30th. For this reason, when maintaining audit documentation, it's important to constantly think about the most reliable, independent source of information. Accessing this information is also just as important. If you're unable to have documents in an organized manner that allows you to efficiently access them, they aren't going to do you a whole lot of good. Filing systems for documents can vary greatly, but generally speaking, as long as you are able to access the information efficiently, the method of organization is a matter of personal preference. It's important to note that sometimes our records have personally identifying information on them. In these cases, it's necessary to exercise extreme caution in how these documents are stored and who and when individuals have access to them. Electronic data management systems are great, but also have a great deal of risk associated with them. It's much harder to authenticate a digitally scanned document than it is to authenticate a document that has wet ink or a seal on it. On the flip side, a strong electronic data management system that is properly implemented with the right access controls, meaning those who can access a system or database can be individually and independently identified, may provide for a strong electronic audit trail, since it can provide the time, date, and other electronically identifying information such as an IP address of when the information was accessed, modified, deleted, or added. All that said, the audit trail boiled down to its purest form is one simple question. Does corroborating evidence exist to prove what you're trying to say? And audit readiness leads to one additional question: is that information accessible? When contemplating audit readiness in light of designing systems and implementing controls, it's important to keep three main things in mind. Complexity. More complex transactions may require a greater deal of corroborating evidence, so ensure that proper documentation exists to substantiate a transaction from start to finish. Physical storage. This not only relates to where documents are going to be stored, but also the security of that location. You want to make sure that only the individuals you want to have access to that information, when you want them to have access to that information, are able to have that access. Last is retention. How long do these documents need to be stored? Legal, grant, and internal requirements may be greatly different or may overlap. It's important to ensure that you're complying with the most restrictive time retention requirements to ensure you are not penalized for being out of compliance due to an inability to produce the documents. Most audits rely on reviewing a sample of documents and placing a great emphasis on a review of processes and procedures, or what we as auditors typically call internal controls. Most people simply refer to this as checks and balances. Now, internal controls can be as simple as requiring 2 signatures on a check, or can be more complex and require a system of approvals and timestamps for each transaction. Now, as I mentioned earlier, going to the doctor and getting that clean bill of health is what we all want. But when the doctor gives you those recommendations or those lifestyle changes, he doesn't go home with you. He doesn't follow you to the store and make sure you take those Oreos out of your cart and replace them with apples. An audit works the same way. Any deficiencies or areas for improvement identified in the audit aren't going to be implemented by the auditor. The auditor may make recommendations, but it is ultimately up to the organization itself to implement the necessary changes and make these improvements. So what can we do as an organization in the meantime? Or what if this is our first audit ever? How do we make sure we're prepared? First, take a look at your internal controls and processes. Is there any way for one person to circumvent the entire process? If so, can that be prevented? Second, make sure all your documents are organized in a manner that they can be easily accessed for audit and provide that clear audit trail. And last, take a deep breath and remember that an audit is a process for improving your internal processes. And unless you're blatantly cheating, stealing, or not complying with the grant requirements, you really should have nothing to worry about. If you still have concerns, give us a call and we can have our team come out and perform an audit assessment for your organization. We look forward to working with you.